As we've covered time and again, the Great War was one of attrition, leading to many commercial arms being pressed into service. Let's investigate what may be the smallest among them. Hi, I'm Othais, and this, well, let me get it. This is why we don't carry these here. This is the Pieper Bayard pistol, often called the Model 1908, although that's more of a collector's term. Obviously, you're going to struggle to see it from where you are, so let's get a closer look in the light box. This diminutive handgun is only 5 inches in length and weighs in at roughly 1 pound unloaded. It has a magazine capacity of just 5 rounds. Kind of like a bolt-action rifle, but this time in 32 ACP. All this means that what you are looking at is probably the most adorable thing we have ever had on the show. I'm going to set this down because it feels almost dangerous to hold. I've been somewhat neglecting the history of an important man to arms development. Born in Soest, Germany in 1840, Henry Pieper studied engineering in his own hometown and later Warstein before moving to Liège, Belgium in 1859. Taking up gunmaking, he would found his own company in 1866, producing shotguns and rifles. One of his earlier decisions was to get into his own barrel making, buying a factory in Nossenvo to support his Liège efforts. It's worth noting that you can find Remington double barrels, which were manufactured by Pieper. As we covered in our Belgian Mauser 1889 episode, a number of notable Belgian gunsmiths would form a consortium in 1887 and then again more permanently at the adoption of the first smokeless Mauser rifle. This of course resulted in Fabrique Nationale, of which Henry was both a major shareholder and administrator. We heard Pieper's name again in our Nagant revolver episode, as his company's own gas seal design would compete and ultimately fail to win Russian contracts, though it did see some service in Mexico and private sales. In 1897, the firm of Henri Pieper was expanded, with his son stepping up to help. Edouard Pieper would take on a much newer part of the business: bicycles, automobiles, things that go. Henri Pieper, the company, is credited with the first hybrid electric car, though unfortunately the endeavor ultimately failed in the highly competitive automotive market at the time. Henri would not see the collapse, however, as he passed away in 1898, leaving Edouard to struggle with the cars and bicycles, while his other son Nicholas took on the core business, training with his father since the age of 13. Nicholas Pieper was intimately familiar with both the daily workings and his father's grand vision for modern production using the best technology and practices available. The family business lurched along with decent performances in the arms market, but poor results, as I said, in automotive, and in the end, all the attempts to stabilize the latter that failed and bankruptcy was inevitable. Nicholas, his brother-in-law Auguste Lambrecht, and some other investors were not put out entirely, though. They simply restructured the business into a new one, focused back on arms production, and without all those extras, well, in 1905 they started a stock company, Anciens Establishment Pieper, and I can't speak French, which was launched with capital stock of 2 million francs, retaining the Liège factory and the Nossenvo barrel shop. Starting in 1907, a brand new state-of-the-art factory was begun, again in Liège, specifically Herstal. The facility would be huge, employing nearly 1,000 people within the first 2 years, and about 200 of them, well, they were women trained to work the milling machines or producing other small parts. A new director was also hired, and this is where it gets a little weird. An American industrial reporter visiting Pieper in 1908 recounts a Monsieur Gobel, an engineering graduate who had spent 10 years with Fabrique Nationale and a few with Loewe. Gobel was apparently a student of the American School of Manufacturing and favored Pratt & Whitney tooling, though he would equally pick, cheaper German or French gear if it was available and could still do the same task. There's only one problem with this whole story. All the period announcements say the director of Pieper was one Bruno Claris, a man who has a history of arms and automotive patents, which would easily qualify him to be our Monsieur Gobel, But of course, Claris and Gobel are two totally different names entirely. Did our American friend get the wrong name, or the wrong person, or an employee? I can't seem to sort it out. I suspect that they might be the same person, but I cannot prove it. There's biographical data from the reporter for Gobel, and there's patents from Claris, and not much of either from the other. Regardless, re-emphasizing arms manufacture, this new Pieper company would chase both military contracts and broad civilian sporting sales. While there is a specifically martial pistol we'll have to discuss some other day, this isn't that episode yet. Buying up or otherwise producing patents from other inventors did become a habit though. We saw one such gun already in our Steyr Pieper episode, a Jean Warnant invention put into commercial production at Pieper and then licensed to Steyr in Austria. The Demontant, as that pistol was known to just the Pieper company, was an attempt to cash in on the pocket pistol market, the one that was started by John Moses Browning with his FN 1900 pistol. This slim, handy, pocketable handgun was perhaps the first to kick off what we'd consider the modern concealed carry mindset. In the following decade, a wide variety of pocket pistols would be introduced. Some we've seen already in our series, and many more we will not. It was a huge boom market. Their one common feature was the ammunition. 32 automatic Colt pistol, a diminutive but functional semi-rimmed cartridge which enabled a compact blowback operated handgun small enough to fit into a jacket or pants pocket. I know some of you are going to bring up 25 ACP, but that's a vest pistol, and we'll get there in a moment. While we've already covered one 32 ACP that Pieper would investigate, today we're hitting on another one closer to the company as well, because it appears to be a design from their own director, that is Mr. Claris. Dating back to at least 1906, this was a blowback operated semi-automatic handgun with an over-barrel recoil spring, which was intended to allow it an extremely compact form. Recoil would, of course, be an issue, so it was equipped with a buffer spring as well. Finally, it touted a unique, toolless takedown method, which I'll show you in just a moment. I've had a hard time getting a good lock on when this gun hit the market. The common collecting name is the model 1908, which actually seems to come from the date of the US patent, and honestly it was when the US patent was accepted, not applied for. It may also have been an attempt to differentiate this gun from that other Bayard pistol I mentioned before. This guy, known as the Bergman, or the Bayard, or the Bayard Bergman, or the Bergman Bayard. You can see how this starts to get confusing. The reason that I call everything a Bayard and it keeps coming up, that's because it was a trademark worked up by the Pieper firm in order to market their entire pistol line. The Bayard is the name of Charlemagne's horse, who supposedly was immortal and had carried several knights over his years and understood human language. It's a dope horse. Also, Henri Pieper, both man and company, had been previously located on Rue des Bayards, so the name was known to the firm. The knight emblem and Bayard name found its way on both this pistol and the other, causing confusion even till today. Pieper would always call this little guy the Bayard self-loading pistol or the Bayard pistol. Once it was superseded by a newer handgun, a later adaptation of the FN 1910, it became the old model Bayard. Anyway, model 1908 might not be all wrong, because I've seen at least one article discussing this handgun by the winter of 1908, so it must have been in production by then, and since they were making it, we can finally get a look at what the heck it is that we're talking about. Oh boy. I know it's kind of hard to understand how small this handgun is, so I want to be very clear here. This is the previously seen Dreiser 1907. It looks monstrous next to this, but let me really blow your mind. I'm going to move this guy up, and we're going to bring in a gun probably no one's ever heard of, but some might know the size of. This is a 1911. Look at the scale difference here. You guys know how big this gun is. This is tiny. As a matter of fact, when it comes to gripping it, I've noticed with these smaller guns, I tend to go ahead and get my, let me get where you guys can see it. I tend to put index finger in the safe spot, which by the way is almost in the path of the barrel. That's terrifying. And then I tend to wrap two fingers, tuck the pinky and roll. Let me show you that from the top. Tuck, pinky, and roll. The problem is my ring finger is thick enough that it's actually hanging off the grip and I can't quite get a tuck on that pinky. This thing is awful to try to hold on to. I love it. Now, besides being the most adorable handgun on the series, it actually does function. It's a semi-automatic blowback, which means we do have a magazine. Heel release, so right there, pull back, and I found it tends to fall free, but if it doesn't, there's two little helper tabs right there to give you a hand. We'll get that again. Oh man, it's so small. Okay, I'm gonna stop reacting to how cute it is, and we're gonna talk about this handgun. So, we have ejection port on this side, slide operated, obviously. Flip it around. We've got our manual safety, which is flip back for safe, which is a little hard to do one-handed, and you can kind of get your greasy mitts up there to flick it forward in order to defend yourself. We'll see Mae on range with that in a moment. Now, as far as the claim to fame for this gun is not just the fact that it's compact and that it has some recoil mitigating factors in it, but also it is very easy to take down. So I'm going to start by pushing back on this front sight. So let me get this to the upper camera, right where you guys can see it. Let me switch because I am right-handed. So I'll push back on that guy, and I'm just going to make sure I don't lose him, and I'm going to tip him out. So just push back, tip out. That's all it is. And I'm going to wiggle so that I don't, there we go. Sorry to obscure that on you guys, but you get the idea. Push back, tip out. Take the spring out, careful not to kink it or bind it because it tends to be where people damage these guns is in taking them apart. And then that's it. That's the whole assembly because pull back, pop off. There you go. That is the gun field strip. Now, don't be confused by this side. This is not the barrel or anything to do with that. This is actually the tube that holds on to our recoil spring right there. And it's set that way so that you're able to get this guy right here on and off. But our barrel is actually down low, as you can see from the front camera. Right there's our muzzle, and it's in this little boxed housing that is screwed down into in the frame. So it's well contained, separate from the spring. No binding or anything between the two. And again, the reason the spring is over top is because if they try to put it below and move it forward, that would increase the size of the gun. This is supposed to be an ultra compact pistol for its time. I think they came away, I mean, I'm hard pressed to imagine getting smaller than this and still retaining 32 ACP and making it controllable. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, down in here, let me get where you guys can see it. Down in here, there's going to be a little bit more to it. We're going to see our buffer spring and some other stuff, but we will not be able to show you that here. I don't want to strip her that far. Instead, we're going to see it over in our animation in a moment. But I want to talk about markings. Now, if I can get this to the, you know what, I'll do it in the upper camera. I'll pull this guy. What you're going to find, patented plastic and pokey, here and here. If this gun was produced under German occupation for German forces, you're going to see a couple of little German eagles, one at the slide, one at the frame, right on top of each other. Very clear indication of German use in the war, and otherwise they're handy commercial guns, and there's really not a lot of value difference between the two because roughly half of production seems to have been German made, so it's not like it's rarer because of this marking, you just know a little bit more about it. Still pretty cool. Now that didn't give you a very strong look deep down inside this handgun, so let's make a little bit of an improvement on this method by putting on our X-ray specs and turning over to an animation.
As we load our 5-round magazine, we'll see the heel release is tapered to be pushed out of the way before snagging a notch in the magazine body. The spring pressure for this is provided by a long, winding flat spring, which is also responsible for resetting the trigger. We manually pull back the slide, release, and now the pistol is ready to fire. While we're here, note the trigger bar in orange. It features a rotating disconnector at its rear, which tips the sear. Note that the disconnector has its own flat spring, allowing it to pivot under the sear, as the trigger is returned forward on release, popping up back into position on the other side. As the sear tips, it frees the hammer to fall, driven forward by its own dedicated coil spring. The system does have an out-of-battery safety, which is sprung to block the path of the hammer unless its forward extension is depressed by the breech block, which only happens in battery. The Bayard also has a manual safety. In the forward position, it allows for the long arm of the sear to be able to rotate up and down when the trigger is pulled. Flipping the safety back causes the semicircular wedge to block the sear arm, preventing it from rotating and dropping the hammer. In order to remain compact, the recoil spring is set over top the barrel. It has two functions, to return the slide forward and to resist the recoil generated by firing. Most blowbacks use strong recoil springs difficult to manipulate manually, but the Bayard instead opted for a second buffering spring. An unusual clock-style spring. However, it does not wind and unwind, but rather acts like a compression spring. It is not depressed during manual operation, but just resists the last bit of rearward travel of the slide when the gun is fired, somewhat dampening the transfer of recoil to the shooter. And finally, ejection is right side out the port, thanks to a simple solid ejector bar in the left side of the frame. Alright, time for me to take this bad boy out to the range.
Doch jetzt ist vorbei und die Zeiten vorüber. Ja, was? Einmal Putsches, das kommt nicht mehr wieder. Ja, was? Das kommt nicht mehr wieder.
It's so tiny. Now, the Bayard pistol would see a fair few years of production, lasting from 1908 until it was phased out in 1923. Over that time, it saw a number of minor changes, which can be divided roughly into just three major variations. The first features a single grip screw through the horn grips, square cut slide serrations, the left interior rail that retains the slide, that does not extend all the way to the rear of the gun. The sear and hammer locking levers are powered by a singular coil spring. The first guns off the line were all in 32 ACP as we've covered, but by 1911, a 380 configuration was also offered. Often called 9mm short, this was a slightly beefier round for self-defense that still allowed for a compact framed blowback pistol. The only real visual difference between the 32 and the 380 is the magazine, so not much to see from the outside. 380 became available within the first version of the Bayard and carried on through the second, which appears sometime around serial number 22,000. Here, the grips are secured by two screws and come in either horn or later hard rubber. The barrel has grown nearly 3mm in length, and the overall length of the gun is 2.5mm greater. The frame is thicker across the board with an addition of about 20 more grams of weight. The sear and hammer now have their own coil springs, each larger than the original singular one that powered both. In 1912, another cartridge would be introduced, this time in the other direction. 25 ACP, an extremely small round designed to make for a vest pocket-sized pistol. While there are certainly examples of more diminutive cartridges in the margins of small arms history, this is probably the smallest centerfire that was popularly, widely sold. Pieper took advantage of this cartridge to create an ever so slightly, roughly 1 ounce lighter third variant of the Bayard. Here, the barrel, which was screwed into larger guns, is integral. The upper slide has been narrowed, and the trigger guard has a new contour. Okay, technically there are some 25 ACPs that look a lot like the first pattern, but they're very, very rare, and it's not really the feature of the show. Yes, specific to the Steyr Pieper, not this gun, there are a handful of 25 ACPs that ended up in military inventories. And then beyond that, a lot of private purchases may have involved this, but we're really not going down the private purchase route unless it was a militarily approved private purchase, if that makes sense. Now, the only reason that a gun this small, even in 32 ACP, has even made it on this show, well, that's because it did make its way into official military inventory, and only because of desperation brought on by the fact that war were declared. And thanks to the war, well, the Germans occupied Belgium in 1914, and that Pieper factory was seized for Central Powers production, notably bayonets and firearms parts, rarely whole guns, though of course this little guy would be an exception. The Bayard was kept in production through the war. The majority of guns in the 102,000 to 200,000-ish serial range will display German proof marks. Most notable is the Reichsadler at the front, stamped both in frame and in the slide right near the muzzle. You may also find unit markings stamped into the grip frame, though this was not entirely the norm. That's because, for the most part, they were issued to officers, or rather, purchased by them. The going rate was 34 marks a pop, paid for out of pocket to the German government, which is the critical component of this. Bayards were also purchased by Austria, though they had meant to order the 380 version, which would make it compatible with their preferred Frommer Stop. Now thankfully the Frommer Stop and other guns were available to Austria in 32 ACP because that is all the Germans would authorize. Literally only 32 ACP and only the Bayard pistol, and I say this because the first time Austria tried to order out a Pieper, they actually wanted a mixture of these guys and that more powerful 9mm Largo Bayard Bergmann Bayard. Those, along with the 380 version of this gun, were refused, and so they had to make do with an initial order of 1,000 of these pocket pistols, which was bulked up to 1,100. And I have no idea if they had any later orders. They didn't really turn up until spring of 1918 anyway, so it looks like they had to make do with another German gun, the Othais in 1907, which they were able to get more of. Post-war production of the Bayard carried on, as I said, until 1923, with the highest serial I know of reported in the 265,000 range. They seem to be linear, and so we can roughly leave that as our total production number, civilian and military combined. And that's about what I know for this handgun. No one seems to have written much about their tiny, essentially non-combat officer's pistol. These were definitely not something most people saw as frontline, and while a few may have found their way into a fight, I'm pretty certain it would be a last-ditch attempt at self-defense. And you're probably not going to live very long to tell the story about how you managed to fend off the enemy with 5 rounds of 32 ACP. There's no service history stories here, guys. The only photo evidence I could find, actually, was a Serbian soldier posed in a photo booth. Whether the gun was his or a prop, I am uncertain, though the carbine on hand seems standard issue, and not something that you would waste in a photo booth. This guy's just not a gun you tend to wave around very often, and so we'll have to replace the lacking historical visual evidence with the present experience of Mae, and have her come in and tell us what it's like to try to use this as a military handgun. Once more, we've made room for Mae, and this time we have the Great War's most adorable personal weapon, Coochie Coochie Coo.
Boys and girls, that has been the theme for this entire episode, hasn't it? I am so sorry.
Paul, thank you for loaning us this pistol. Mae would like you to take it back because I won't shut up about how cute it is. So let me put this in your hands.
Thank you.
And let you tell the audience how cute it is.
Okay. It is pretty cute. This is very tiny, not what I think of for a military pistol at all. I mean, I think of something iconic like the 1911, which is, you know, it's a big frame, don't get me wrong.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, what is that? Sorry, we'll find out at some point someday, I think.
No.
Maybe. And then I think of like I think of the Savage 1907. If I'm thinking like a 32, it's one of my favorite 32s, but there's still a decent size to that one. And then we get into this boy. What is this? This is the tiniest gun. It can disappear behind my hand like a magic trick, practically. It's incredibly small, incredibly light. It's hard for me to think of it as a military pistol at all. Unfortunately, I can't get a full finger grip. I am left kind of hanging off the end down there, sort of. I can just barely get a small little nudge on there with my pinky, but you know.
I wouldn't advise it.
Nope, not in the least. I kind of don't like the fact that I can extend my finger just far enough forward that it goes right next to the muzzle as well. That's a bit unsettling. But I will say the one thing I do love about this grip, that beaver tail back here. Man, is it wonderful for really tucking up your grip. You don't have to worry about any kind of slide bite back here, which is fantastic, which you've had to worry about that before.
Yeah, I've had a few of these old 32s take a chunk out of my meaty mitt because I I got fat hands and they roll over that back end. So without that good positive beaver tail and a nice gap between me and the slide,
You'll get a little kiss.
I get 8. I get 8 every once in a while.
That is unfortunate, but yeah, no, that's actually surprisingly pretty good. I'm amazed 5 rounds fit in this magazine though. And speaking of that, the mag release on this one, it's a little button that you depress back here on the heel. And again, from this angle, you can't quite see it, but if I pop it right here, I just don't want it to fall all the way out. The mag actually does kind of fall free pretty easily. And if it doesn't, if it fails for some reason, you've got it just staring up at the ceiling like I was a second ago, there are these nice wings sticking out the side of the mag that help you to get a little grip on there. So yeah, I'm usually not a fan of those heel releases in general, but this one was actually pretty good, pretty positive, and
it was executed way better than you'd ever expect in something this small.
Right,
I
exactly.
thought it would be torturous to get the magazine out. It's
not too bad. The safety is just a flip safety, flip back for on, forward for off. I did notice that it's a little bit difficult, something you have to kind of change your grip around, but once you get it over center, it kind of wants to go no matter which way. So That's not too bad. It's just a little bit awkward to get used to handling. The slide. So, I'm thinking that, like other 32s we've shot before, some of them, that the slide's going to be a little bit rough or going to be a little bit hard to kind of pull back on. You think the spring pressure is going to be difficult.
You've got a blowback action in a very compact size. So the natural tendency is to power up the recoil spring to help eat up some of that recoil. That's exactly what it's there for. This one doesn't feel like they powered it up much at all. It's actually quite smooth. It
was smooth, easy to use. It was surprising and pretty cool.
I think they're banking on the buffer spring. We'll see how that goes in a minute, though.
Yep. You just need to be careful, of course, you don't accidentally go over this ejection port with your grip any. The fact that it's like right there and at any point you could be accidentally gripping up a little bit too high.
Yeah, if you rolled your knuckle somehow.
Just a little bit. Yeah, that is a bit unsettling, but something to kind of be expected. But yeah, overall ergonomics, it's teeny-tiny, it's adorable, but you know what? Surprisingly, the features on it aren't all too bad to work with.
It's kind of odd. You get it in your hand, and it's too small. You hold it, and this is too small to be anything productive.
Right.
But then from there, everything functions a lot better than you expect. Like that's the nice thing about it. It's like you start from bad, and then everything about handling it goes towards good, except the safety is a bit awkward.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll take it. What does that mean when you actually pull the trigger, though? Like, how is shooting?
The sights, so for some of the smaller guns, we've seen them be kind of on the more terrible side. And don't get me wrong, these aren't great either, but they are tall, which is not what I was, they're taller than what I expected for this tiny gun. I don't know why, everything about it to be tiny. But no, those are actually surprisingly okay.
Terrible for handgun sights.
Yes.
Reasonable to good for pocket pistol sights.
Right, I would agree. Now there is like a weird, because this is part of like the takedown, I get it. Like there's these weird kind of masses sticking out the side when you're looking down the gun. So that is a bit unusual and it can kind of throw you off the first time. But no, they don't really get in the way of the sight. It's just like, oh, there's extra there. That's it. Pulling the trigger. Nothing really remarkable about the trigger. It's not too heavy or too light. I did notice like it's something that it maybe feels a little bit gritty, if that, maybe. Just mushy. Maybe that's a better word, mushy.
The problem is this gun has a transfer bar system that's at best, and it's known to fail, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And then the reset's really long too. Yeah,
we're going to talk about that in performance and stuff,
But in terms of feel, long reset, weird mushy pull. The trigger's kind of the downside. Although positionally, I found that I could use that trigger even though the gun is very small.
Yeah, that was unusual. Even you, who has a bigger hand than me, I thought you were going to have a difficult time with it.
Yeah, no, I actually am able to get my finger on there and pull all the way through without really bending my knuckles up too much. So good job.
Yeah, not too bad there. And then of course your favorite part of this, the recoil on it. I was expecting it to be a lot snappier than what it was, but surprisingly very manageable.
So the gun has two things going for it. One is that buffer, which I'm not sure how much it really contributes or not. And two, much more importantly to me, is the low bore axis. So especially with someone like me with that gun, may I have that again?
Sure.
Sorry, I just took it from you, but I'll take it again. When I put my hand down the length of this and I point my finger, if I'm looking at this, I know it's hard for you guys to see, but my finger is actually passing into the same plane as the lower part of the barrel. So that means that the recoil point is alongside and partially into the top of my finger. That is very low bore axis.
Yeah, it almost gives a linear recoil sensation. Don't get me wrong, it's still snaps up a little bit.
You have no mass to help, but it's 32 ACP. Again, I think the buffer's probably helping some, but that low bore axis.
Fantastic.
It's still worse than shooting a Ruby or any of the other big 32s.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I would certainly call it comparable to like the Draiza. Like it feels a lot like shooting a Draiza, but it's much smaller.
Which is not what you're expecting either, so you're pleasantly surprised by it.
Yeah, I'd give it high marks in terms of recoil, believe it or not.
I would agree. Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty much it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything other fancy parts to it.
Nothing really extra special about it.
So before we talk about anything complicated, let's say this gun functioned perfectly. Would you be willing to take something like this into World War I?
So therein lies the problem. It's a really tiny pistol that's in 32, and I've only got 5 rounds of it. That makes me really nervous. Presumably, assuming it all functions well, I don't know. I don't feel very confident with this guy because I've only got the 5 rounds to go with, and it's super tiny.
So the problem with this handgun is we talk a lot about the context of weapons, like where they were designed to be and where they ended up.
Right.
And this gun is designed to be a sub 10 feet get off me pocket pistol.
Yeah, this is like your last ditch. Like you happen to have it on you. Shoot, situation's gone bad. You just got to pull it and go.
Yeah, this is clearly a civilian personal defense weapon. Below even that, though, this is a lot of people say this is my get off me gun. I'm not kidding. Like this is the thing that a lot of guys who are a bit older will kind of take something like this without a holster and stick it in their pocket in case of like a confrontation at 2 feet.
I mean, if this puts it into perspective, I did check and see if it fit in my jeans pocket, and it does fit in a girl's jeans pocket.
It fits in girl pants.
Yeah, that's really tiny for perspective, people.
Yeah, this gun gets tinier by the second. So the context of this gun is it's designed to be tiny and controllable. So step 1, make it tiny. Step 2, make it controllable. Step 3, profit.
I'm amazed they managed to make it controllable. They did a good job. It actually is controllable.
But nothing about that says take it into a battlefield.
No.
And so by its fundamental nature, no.
It just can't. There's just no way. I can't see a situation that I would want to have this in battle. This is my, oh no, I'm down to this.
I mean, I'd take it over a knife.
Yeah.
Well, until it ran out of ammo, and then I'd want a knife. Yeah. But, okay. What about in the context of it actually being a get-off-me gun, and you're in the year 1913? Like, there's not much else to choose from. It's like a handful of vest pistols are on the market. Is this going to be one of your top vest pistols, at least, to kind of judge it by its own design, at least? How much confidence do you have in it going bang and being able to point and use it?
So does it still perform well? Because we did have an issue when we first took it out on range with that trigger reset. It was not resetting until we helped it along after every shot, practically.
Paul is a picky person, and this is a very nice Bayard 1908.
Yes, it is.
And it still had trigger reset issues until we got in there and cleaned it up some. Not even that it was dirty, we just oiled it because it was dry.
And then it weirdly got better as we continued to shoot
it. But it was, by the way, not bone dry. I shouldn't even say that. It was within the parameters that most guns function very well.
Yeah.
But it did not want to reset the trigger. And then I've also heard horror stories of the disconnect having issues, not setting back up and the gun staying disconnected. So I don't know that I have a high degree of confidence in one of these going bang every single time.
Right, so even for a get-off-me gun, I don't know, that trigger reset not functioning right just makes me too nervous. I don't even think I'd want it for that.
Yeah, and it can be very hard to get a gun this compact to be that reliable anyway. So we're kind of in a weird place. I have a lot more respect for this gun now than I did before we started this episode.
Absolutely. It had a lot of surprises to it.
Right. I think it's actually been one of the more, it's so strange, but we shoot all this wild stuff. You know, machine guns and shotguns and whatever else. And I've actually had a really good time interacting with this pistol because it's been very unique in this show. Not just in that it's small, but then that it mitigated its recoil very well. And it had some surprising features.
Basically, it exceeded the expectations of what we originally had for it.
As a concept and a novelty, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would never bet my life on it.
Not for a minute.
No. Anything else on it?
Nope, that's pretty much it. It's adorable. Thank you again, Paul, for the lend. We greatly appreciate you.
So, coming up next, Mae's top 5 most adorable guns of the Great War. You're going to have to write it now.
I'll do it for the patrons. How about that?
We'll think about it. All right, so thank you all for tuning in, and check in with us next time. Also, stay after the credits to see any updates of the show.
Bye, guys. Hey guys, hope everyone safely made it through the holidays. I don't know what y'all did, but Crozier spent most of his time off napping. If anyone missed our Discord link off the C&Rsenal website for the past 2 weeks, we apologize, we had no clue it was MIA. But it is up now, so come join if you feel like chatting with the crew. Also, out of all the swag, the Winchester patches are nearly gone, about 2 dozen left. Come get them while you can, this is the only batch run of them. And, most importantly, from everyone at the C&Rsenal team, we hope you all have a Happy New Year.